Okay, so I'm just going to record again. So hi everyone and good afternoon. Just to introduce ourselves, and I'm Barrick, and I'm one of the Cardio Webinar team. And welcome to session 24 now of our Cardio Webinar program. We're delighted as always to have the additional support of the British Cardiovascular Society and the BJCA. Again, if you'd like to teach, please either message us on Twitter, which is @CardioWebinar, or email us on cardiowebinar@gmail.com. Next slide, please, Bish. So I'll just go to the format and some housekeeping. All participants have been muted from the start, and the talk will be 40 minutes, and we'll have Q&A at the end. And so for the questions, you can either use the raise hand function, or you can ask your questions on the chat, and I can unmute you. All webinars are kindly being recorded by the BJCA, and they're doing a fantastic job of hosting it on the BJCA TV video gallery, so you can rewatch at your own convenience. And finally, in the event of a meeting crash, in the first instance, what we'll do is we'll relaunch the meeting using the same Zoom ID. But if this fails, we have prepared a backup Zoom meeting ID, which we released immediately on our Twitter account, which is @CardioWebinar. So please do make sure you're following us. So without further ado, it's a great pleasure to introduce Vishal Luther, who's a final year ST7 EP and Devices Fellow here at Imperial. And this session is going to be co-hosted by Dr. Asal Sayed, an ex-BJCA president and a consultant at Barts NHS Trust and King George's NHS Trust. So on behalf of the Cardio Webinar team, it's a pleasure to have them both this series today to talk to us about applying for a consultant cardiologist post, what I wish I knew 18 months ago. Over to you.
Thanks very much, Barrick. So many of you know me as the other half of the Cardio Webinars team, and we've been running since April. I took a small hiatus whilst I was preparing for a consultant interview, and I was pleased to be appointed. But during that process, I learned a hell of a lot. And to be honest, I think this perhaps could be one of the most valuable webinars because we know lots and lots about aortic stenosis, but we don't really get prepared for this. So over the next 30 minutes, we'll be going through a various series of themes, and I'm grateful at the end, probably around 30 minutes we'll spend with Q&A. And I'm grateful to Asal co-hosting this with me, who was my year or two senior, who's also been quite prolific. He's been a consultant now for a couple of years, and he knows this process very well. So together we'll be able to answer any pertinent questions. Now the slides are slides that I've created. They're my thoughts, my ideas, and I've had them vetted by Asal and a couple of other consultants. They are obviously very tailored towards EP, but I've therefore tried to generalize it as much as possible to the consultant interview in general. And these are opinions, and I hope that these opinions are in grounds with what everyone else would feel. So let's get started. So you've now, let's just imagine you're ST6 and you've got 18 months to go. First time when you'll start to explore the question consultancy is about to come about. And there's a series of questions you need to ask. And I've detailed them out predominantly on the left side of this panel. Question one is can you move outside your home area? This will ultimately dictate a lot about your subsequent job. Because if you can, like myself, you have the flexibility to go outside of your local area. My area was London. That opens up a lot of additional opportunities for job applications, job prospects thereafter. Many people do not have that luxury because of personal life, family life, the partner's job, or children already settled in school, and that will therefore dictate your job environment and the distance that you can travel. And so you need to be clear very early on what you can and can't do. Equally, is this a part-time or a full-time position? And then the next question you need to ask is, do you have your mind set on a tertiary university centre or a district general hospital? And they both have their own advantages and disadvantages. We're not going to go through the ins and outs, but ultimately you'll know if you're more research bound, if there's a specific very advanced specialty like TAVI or advanced VT ablation or lead extraction, something like that, which can only be undertaken in a specialist, super specialist unit, then ultimately you're forcing yourself into that particular area. Now, sometimes you have to compromise. If the family thing is more important, which most time it is, you then have to sacrifice the tertiary center. But if you have the luxury of being able to go for that tertiary dream that you might want to go for, and your family is flexible, then that's great. Now, think about the salary that you're going to go for. Is it going to be an NHS salary or is it a university salary? Now, most of us will be going for an NHS salary, but if you're particularly academically minded, then it may be a split post between half clinical, half academic. You need to think about where that salary is going to come from. So that's kind of the basic questions you kind of need to ask. I think question 2 will pretty much answer itself for most, but 1 and 3 are the key things you need to think about. Then we move on to the right side, and that's now when you start getting into the nitty-gritty. Now we're going to go into the USP concept again and again. You really need to ask yourself, what is your USP, your unique selling point? And that is really how you prepare your whole application. And we'll talk about that in a separate slide later. You need to be honest with yourself. If you're going in for an advanced specialty or doing a procedure which is particularly complex, do you need to go into a period of advanced post-CCT training because your current period of training does not allow you to have covered the skills required to perform that at a consultant level? And if that is the case, then you may need to embark on that. Alternatively, if you've not had a full breadth of training by the time you need to CCT, then you may need to be forced to undertake a post-CCT fellowship period. Now, we'll talk about this in a moment, but signing up to NHS jobs, really important thing. This will be the first thing I'd recommend doing after we finish this talk, is to sign up to NHS jobs, because this is a national platform where all the jobs that are released are advertised. We're going to look at a couple of other examples of these national platforms, but the particular attraction about this site is that it gives you links onto your phone, and I'll show you that later. And when you do sign up to NHS jobs, it's worthwhile actually having a go at doing a mock application form. Now, start documenting your memorable cases. This, again, we're going to talk about later, but you'll find that every time you're asked a question in an interview, that question sounds so much better when there's emotion behind the question. So if someone says to you, tell us about your ability to work in a team, and you say, I have excellent team working experience, and that's reflected in my MSFs, and I'm a good team player, I'm flexible, I'm supportive, and that's great. You're basically saying everything that everyone else would probably say, but if you have a memorable case that's pertinent to you to back it up, it works really well. And the problem certainly I had in that last 1 month is knowing, yes, every day we show examples of excellent communication. We show examples of teamwork and of being supportive, of working under pressure. We do this every day. We just don't consider it. Now, in a place within your e-portfolio or somewhere personal to you, it's really worthwhile at this stage with 18 months to go to start documenting these experiences. For me, the best stories are always those stories that kind of make your heart flutter. If you remember it, there's every day, I'm sure there's periods of times when your heart just suddenly skips a beat and gets a bit nervous. Those periods are full of emotion. And if you can express those emotional times in an interview, you look really good. The panelists engage in what you're saying and all the worthwhile there. Now, 18 months to go. Some people say do this, some people say don't. The statement is the second from bottom, email clinical leads. So what do I mean by that? So let's say you're approaching 18 months and there's a series of institutes, let's say for me, so EP. I did this with 18 months to go. I emailed the clinical leads at various other hospitals throughout the country saying, hi, I'm approaching CCT or within 18 months. Is there anything in the future that's about to take a job that might be coming about? And some of them may not reply, that's fine. Some of them may reply and say, actually, there's something about to come out and we'll keep you in mind. And it's important to do that, I think, because then people start talking. The fact that you're approaching CCT then gets shared because it's a fairly small community, and then that helps. And the last thing is grapevine communication. I'll explain a bit more about what that means on this slide. Grapevine communication is word of mouth, what you hear on the street, so to speak. It's where people start telling you that various jobs are being created. And certainly with 18 months to go, your brain will start to get much more attuned into the various areas where jobs. Whenever you hear that there could be a job coming from somewhere, you need to ask yourself, what is the stimulus for that job being created? Is it a vacancy in the department? Is it coping with a waiting list, or is it a planned expansion? And the reason to ask that question is because you then start to understand what the likely timeline of that job being created is. So if there's a vacancy in the department, that job is probably going to be created pretty quickly, because most departments will either fill that vacancy with a locum, who will then have their own lifespan before they have to move on, or they might become substantive, or the covering consultant body will have to overwork to compensate. So that if there is a vacancy in the department, it's likely that that advert will be released fairly quickly. If it's coping with a waiting list, it's sort of in between. It depends on how busy the pressure is. And if it's particularly challenging with the current waiting list, if the waiting list is expanding, especially in EP because of the vast demand for AF ablation, if there is a waiting list which is increasing, then the job may be created sooner. If it's a planned expansion, that's the one which may take a bit more time. For example, if they're saying we need an extra lab, and with the view of the fact that it's going to be an extra lab, then we might need to expand thereafter. That clearly will take more time. So you need to understand, when people say there's a job on its way, there's a job coming, what is the stimulus for that job being created? You need to know, is it going to be advertised as a locum versus substantive? How far down the line the job proposal is? And now, whenever you start making these communications with other units, never make any promises. It's important to be enthusiastic. It's important to say that you're interested and that, you know, the virtues and ideas and the skill set that they are wanting to have is aligned with yours. But you need to be very frank that if there are the units that you're looking at, that they know that nothing is set in stone, that your personal circumstances may change, and that may influence it. They know that you can never really commit, but it's important to make it clear that you're never promising anything too early on. Just because we've been talking about the stimulus for a job, I think it's important to understand for yourselves, because I didn't know this until just last couple of months, is how is a job actually created? So we talked about what the stimulus is. It's either there's a vacancy, waiting list, or planned expansion. Once it's recognized that there could be the potential for a job, the next step is the creation of a business case. Now remember, a business case needs likely the clinical lead, who usually writes the proposal. That takes time, it takes effort, and depending on the urgency that the demand for that job is, will govern how quickly that business case is written. Once a business case is prepared, it then needs to go to the departmental manager, usually the head of finance, who will then start to approve it. Again, that takes time. Following on from that, it then has to go to the board, whether it be the trust board, the executive board, who then have to approve. And then following from that, once the whole business case is made and a job plan is created, that job plan then has to go to the Royal College, who then have to approve it. Then the advert gets released. Now, depending on the stimulus for the need for the job, that process can take a couple of weeks, or actually it can take years. And it's important to recognize that, because again, when someone says to you that there's an interest that a job could be coming about, you need to know where in the pathway that job plan is and how likely and how quickly those particular steps will turn around. Now, this was how I felt with about 12 months to go. Because people used to come up to me and say, Savish, you're in your final year. Oh. And the reality is, there'll be a few things. You'll either have a post-CCT, and you can then give them an answer. You know that there is definitely going to be a job being created somewhere, definitely, that the pathways are all there, and that you've already been in communication with that unit and everything's working well. And you can, if you want to, tell people about that. Nothing is ever set in stone. But for the majority of us, with 12 months to go, you'll feel like this. You'll get a bit annoyed because people will say to you, what's your plan? And, you know, the reality is you'll say, well, I'm going to wait till I've got 6 months to go, and then whatever's there, I'll apply. And I think the purpose of this slide is to say, everybody feels the same thing. When you get to that stage, you're not alone. Everybody's feeling that sentiment. So we're now at a place where you've got 6 months to go. You can now apply. So what should you do? I said before, you need to find your jobs on NHS Jobs. This is the website, jobs.nhs/UK, and then you subcategorize for doctors. Then you essentially down here is where you key in who you are. So you can key in cardiologist. For me, I had to key in cardiologist, and that gave me a search term for all of cardiology. So it gives me everything. That's imaging, heart failure, everything. And then you can do a separate search for electrophysiologist, and that just obviously will focus in on that. But you need to be careful, because if you only search for electrophysiology, some of the job adverts will only be advertised as cardiologist, and in the free text is where it will say electrophysiologist. So if that is the case, you'll then miss out potentially on consultant electrophysiology positions, or whatever your subspecialty is, because you didn't have the appropriate search. Now on the right is a picture I've basically taken from my phone. And this is the daily updates that I have been getting from NHS Jobs, which are specifically set for the search term that I put in. And the search term is cardiologist. And so it gives me usually all the consultant cardiologist search terms and some other things as well. And it's great because every morning I wake up and on my phone, I get an up-to-date list of what the jobs are that are coming about. And I've got one search term for consultant cardiologist, and I had one search term for consultant electrophysiologist. And that was really, really helpful. So I'd really recommend, after this talk, having a look at this website and then specifically setting up the search terms so that they come on your phone as well. Now, just before I move on from this, it's worth, once you find the particular job that you're interested in, logging on and actually having a look through a specific application form. Everything you put in for one application form is transferred across for subsequent. So if you start writing your text now, it's all there for subsequent applications. So you already can start putting in all the details, and that helps. Here's another example of a search engine that allows you to look for jobs. This is BMJ Careers on jobs.bmj.com. I never use this, but this is another recognized one. And the final one is medicine jobs at Royal College London. As we said earlier, the Royal College have to approve every job. Therefore, this is one of the approved things that you need to look for. So you've now at 6 months to go, and you see a job that you like. What do you do next? First thing you have to say is be honest with yourself, are you ready? Remember, with 6 months to go, forget COVID and everything that's happened here. With 6 months to go, there's a lot that's going to happen in those last 6 months. You're going to be, if you're doing a procedural-based subspecialty, you're going to be a lot. If you're doing imaging, you're going to be doing all the things, whatever your subspecialty, you're going to be doing it a lot to prepare yourself to be ready to feel that you're ready for a consultant. If you truly believe that you're ready, then you go about selecting the post. Now, let's say there's a particular job advert that you like. So what do? In every job advert that you like, there will be two pieces of text. One is a job description, and then underneath that is the person specification. The job description will give you everything you need to know about that job. It'll also give you the trust values, and it'll also give you some general descriptions about the trust. And it'll also list out the majority of the consultants who work in the department. You need to know that job description paper really well, because it prepares you really well for the next steps thereafter. I then said the next thing you'll find is the person specification. And on the right here is an example of a person specification. In essence, it highlights the qualifications, experience, management experience, teaching, and personal attributes, which are 1, essential for the job, and 2, desirable for the job. Now, the essential requirements, we're all probably going to have some degree of experience in all of it to be able to do the job once we've achieved CCT. But the important thing really to look at is the desirables, because it's the desirables that really tell you what it is that job is being created. So for me, I have a particular interest in VT ablation, and the job I was going for, they were looking for as a desirable quality VT ablation experience. And so that works. You understand what it is that that job wants and what it is that you can offer. Once you've gone through these two particular documents, the next thing to go through is the Trust website. And you need to spend a lot of time on the Trust website trying to learn as much as you can about it. Learning about the Trust values, learning about the mission statements, the vision, the agendas. And we'll talk more about that later. Then you need to plan your pre-application visit. So remember, this is before you've submitted your application form. You send an email to the nominated lead whose name is on the job description, and you say, please, can I arrange to undertake a pre-application visit? And there are 2 reasons you undertake this. 1 is to work out, why do you really want to work there? And then 2, to work out for them to start to understand why they should hire you. And if there are any 2 things to take from this talk, is this: you need to work out why you want to work somewhere, and why they need to work out why they want to hire you. So a bit more details about the pre-application visit. This is informal. I use the word informal in inverted commas because the reality is every meeting that you have, especially with the consultant body, is more formal than you think. You're being interviewed from day 1. They're working out the nitty-gritty and the ins and outs of you very early on. All right? But when you have meetings, don't just do it with the consultant, you do it with the physiologist, you do it with the nursing staff, you do it with the radiographers, you do it with the management team. You're trying to learn as much as you can about that institute. 1, for you to learn about the department and hospital, and for them to start to learn about you. You should email the clinical lead with your CV, and then talk to as many people as possible. Now, be prepared that some units may not accept a pre-application visit, and it makes sense. If they're having applications from, 20 people who are wanting to visit, it becomes very difficult. So they may say, look, we just can't do it, and they may politely decline. Now, a word on your CV. Now, I think many of us will have an up-to-date CV. I certainly had an up-to-date CV, but I had to significantly adjust the CV when preparing it for a consultant. You need to prepare your CV, imagining that someone on the other side, i.e. an appointing consultant, is reading through it. It needs to get to the nitty-gritty quickly. And I think the best way to do it, and I certainly had with this, is having a paragraph at the beginning, which is a summary statement, which essentially details why they should hire you. Now, it should only be about sort of 6-7 lines and offer some prose for the reader to understand you, and specifically for their institute, their unit, why you are an appropriate candidate for them. Now, if you're going for if you're looking into finding out information from a tertiary centre, then you might need to tailor that paragraph for more of your research attributes, more of your advanced skills. If you're also interested in applying for a district general, you might need to adjust that paragraph for your service development skills slightly higher up in the sentences. Remember that every single sentence, you probably have their attention for about 1 minute and you need to grab it very quickly. The second thing that there should be is a separate paragraph on your USP. Something highlighting what it is your unique selling point, and we'll talk about what is a USP in the next slide. I do think for the interventional specialties, because I certainly knew that the consultants had looked at this, is it should include a logbook summary of your procedural experiences. And you need to be clear, do not put everything you've ever done in your CV. I think this needs to be tailored to keep the viewer engaged. So for example, I've just picked this up, co-authorship on a poster during medical school. You know that's not going to get you the job. You know it's not something you're going to really talk about in interview. So what in your CV should be the things that are going to grab the viewer's attention. So keep it short and keep it pertinent. A really important thing is determining what is your unique selling point. So a USP, a unique selling point, is the assumption is everyone wants their CCT will all have the appropriate skills in the institution. No, the unit is not just looking for someone to be a consultant. They're looking for someone to offer the full breadth of consultant skills. That is having experience in service development, having experience in teaching undergraduates, postgraduates, having experience in developing niche specialties and bringing something new to the department, having experience in setting up trial design or an advanced research, something very different. And it's that, if you can align your own USP to what the job wants, then you're onto a winner. Now, your USP can be a procedural-based thing, like TAVI or VT ablation, or imaging, whether it be advanced CMR. Now, more and more of us are not dual accrediting. So actually, if you have dual accredited, then that's very attractive. If you're an academic and you've got a lot of experience in trial design or statistics, that's very attractive, or medical education or MBA. This is just a list that I've thought about, and I'm sure it's much, much longer. The Chief Registrar Scheme or Topol Fellowship or the Darcy Fellowship, these are all very good things to demonstrate additional qualities that you can sell in an interview. But even if you don't have that, I actually think if you're someone who's simply got ample district general hospital experience covering the breadth of cardiology, that is a USP. Because, you know, the majority of us who spent our ST6, ST7 in tertiary centres who've been doing, you know, complex EP or complex intervention or advanced imaging, whatnot, or general grown-up congenital disease, actually you may have lost the amount of exposure of general cardiology. So if you're someone who's been doing lots and lots of district general experience, that may be a very good USP in certain job descriptions. So you need to think about what is the job description, what are your skills, and it takes time to work it out, and do they align, and then go and sell that point. I'm not going to spend long on this. This is just to show you, because I think many of us will be like, wow, what does the application form actually look like? This is essentially it. You're asked to put in your qualifications from university onwards, up to 11, relevant training courses up to 7. They cover only 3 years. You need to summarize your employment history with a description of your duties and responsibilities. And this is important, a declaration of your practical experience. So you need to state how many procedures you've done in a supervision and independently. You need to list your prizes or other academic distinctions and detail your presentations and so on and so forth. Now the questions, you can, if you log in right now and you apply for any job, you'll be able to start inputting your answers to these now. And I'd urge you to do that to get a feel for the questions. And what you'll realize very quickly is that there's a big push for quality improvement. I personally was struck by having come from a unit, Imperial College, which is very particularly driven towards research and academia. There was a very strong ownership on quality improvement and audit experience. So there was one question on teaching, 250 words. There were one question on, a big question on audit and quality improvement with a whole bunch of sub-questions underneath it, describing the changes, what's been the most valuable, what's been the impact, and can you summarize the learning points? That's a lot of data and text required for quality improvement. And so be mindful that, you know, we may invest a lot of our time in our PhDs, but don't forget about this because it's really important as well. Describe any research projects you've undertaken over the past 5 years. You have to list those out. And 250 words for your management and leadership experience and 250 words for your... And then I've talked about the USP. This is it. You then have a 1,500 free-word text where you're essentially there to tell them how you meet the essential and desirable qualities. And, you know, essentials are a given. It's the desirable qualities they really want to hear about. What you feel you can personally offer, what is unique to you, and what sets you apart from your peers. So that is your USP. So that's why it's really important to start thinking about your USP from the start. I'd strongly encourage getting someone else's application form, and not someone from the same specialty. I don't think you really need to. I think actually it's more emotionally better for yourself to get someone else from a different specialty. So I had a form from an interventional cardiologist, which was really helpful. Now, the selection process. A really important point I must stress is that the selection is not just the interview. Selection is actually 6 things. The interview is the icing on the cake. The panel already has a good understanding about you as an individual and a character and a potential colleague who could work within their department after the first CV, application visit. These are all very important things where you're constantly being assessed. Your application form, the post-application visit, which we're going to talk about next, the calls. I'm going to spend some time now about the calls because I don't talk about it later, and finally the interview. So briefly, the calls. Certainly in the interventional specialties, CP, intervention, and I think all the cardiology specialties, having a senior representative, a senior consultant within the department calling the leads from the other department that you're looking to apply for is generally expected. It works particularly well if your consultants know consultants in the other institution. And the purpose is to share their sentiments about you. That's everything I think I need to say on that. Now, the post-application visit. So this happens once shortlisted. Once you've heard that from the NHS jobs or wherever they've been shortlisted, you then are expected to email. So once you've heard that you've been shortlisted, on that shortlisting will include the panel who are going to interview you. Now, the panel includes the chief executive, medical director, and maybe the deputy medical director, the clinical lead of the specialty you're going to undertake, some of the other consultants in the department who will be on the interview panel, and a departmental manager, whether it be the head of finance or head of governance. And there will also be a lay person and a Royal College person. Now, those people you do not communicate with. You communicate with the individuals within your institution, within the prospective institution. And the first thing to do is identify who they are and send an email stating, I've been shortlisted. I'd be very grateful to meet with you to discuss various things. And what are the things you want to discuss? Well, you should be asking, you probably know a lot about this already from the homework, but really having this one-on-one communication to really learn about it is really, really helpful. Now, I came in quite blindsided because all of this for me came during COVID. So I actually didn't know all these pathways, and I wish I did. But in hindsight, but it comes out because sort of a lot of it's common sense. You know, what is the history of the department and service? What are the challenges facing the department and the service? What is the future direction of the department and service? And the reason you want to know those 3 things is because you need to know where you fit in to the service. If the future direction of the department and the service is that they want to expand on TAVI and they're looking to recruit, and you know they're basically networking with district general hospitals to identify patients who've got severe aortic stenosis, and are trying to encourage tertiary centre cardiologists to go and partner with district general hospitals to bring those patients in. That's important to know because you, if you're a TAVI doctor, may have experience in doing that and then can offer that in your USP. So the purpose of these meetings is 1, yes, you are being interviewed already when you have those meetings, but 2, is for you to really engage in trying to work out the history of the services, the challenges and the future directions. Now, if everything, you may or may not find that the members of the panel will give you a couple of hints as to what some of the questions may be. Next, preparing for the interview. I was ambivalent about whether to go on an interview course, and it was actually Afsal who convinced me to go on it. And I'm really grateful because an interview course is really, really helpful. You can get structures of how to answer interview questions. You may have seen the IST book, which we use as registrars, the STARS and SPIES and so on and so forth. Actually, the real reason why it's helpful is because you get a full day of real intense practicing amongst other peers who are ST7. And they may not be cardiology, which means that you can relax and embarrass yourself and whatnot in front of a group of around 4 or 5 people and have real intense training leading up to the interview. And I found that really helpful. Preparing for the interview, the next thing I'd say is you'll be ambushed with so many questions and you'll have questions coming out of your head. A really important thing to recognize is that ultimately your interview will be about 45 minutes to an hour. And in that 45 minutes to an hour, yes, you want to answer the panelist questions, but you need to make sure that the things that you're most proud of, the things that you really, really want to talk about, have come out in your responses. So in order to do that, it's helpful to prepare, whether it be 5, I picked a number 6, whatever it is, the things that you are most proud of, those things that you're most proud of, make sure that you have them listed so that they're really sharp in your brain. So whatever question comes out, you use the opportunity to bring out your response, to mention one of those questions. Remember, you'll only have about 6 or 7 questions, so make sure you can try and deliver that in your responses. I talked about this earlier, about having examples of personal qualities, but I'm not going to make, I'm definitely going to go over it again because it was really important and something I wish I'd done in advance. The personal qualities are things like communication skills, problem solving and decision making, managing others and team involvement, coping under pressure, organization and planning, and being safe. Now, if you're suddenly thrown into it where, say, give an example of a time when you worked well under pressure, that can be unnerving. And you'll know when you prepare in your consultant interview that these are the questions that may or may not come about. So it's important, especially if you've got 18 months, 12 months, whatever, before you're about to apply, to start planning, thinking about what those examples are, because we do them every day. The problem is we just don't think about it and we forget. Share your vulnerabilities. That was some advice I had, and I think that works really well. Remember that the people on the panel are human beings, and they have their own insecurities and vulnerabilities themselves, and they remember what they were like when they were in your shoes. And also, they expect to see someone who's human on the other side. Ultimately, you're going to be their consultant colleague, and they want to know that you're someone that they can work with. And I think if you come across as very robotic and very automated, that actually works slightly negatively. So being honest and open and sharing vulnerabilities and of what you felt and what you learned in all your experiences really goes down well. I will say is look at the CQC report for your institution. And if it's a unit that's working very well, then glorify the unit by sharing the accolades that they've undertaken. If it's a unit that's not done so well, then you can start to think about what it is that you can bring to help improve the department. Frameworks. There are 4 domains of the GMC. There are 5 arms of the CQC. Each trust you go to has its own values, and there are 7 pillars of clinical governance. As you lead up to your interview, you will have these ideas focused, etched in your brain. And it's really important that your understanding of these things comes out in your responses. So if you're asked, what makes you professional? That's quite a scary question. But actually, what they're really asking is do you understand the 4 domains of good clinical practice? Because that defines our professionalism. Governance. Now, I'm not going to go into this. There's lots to appreciate with relation to governance, and be prepared that you will get a question on governance. Understanding of appraisal and revalidation, duty of candor, who is the Caldecott guardian? Have you read the CQC report? Do you practice risk management? What is your understanding of the DATIX process? Have you had experience in the complaints process? The question I got asked in my interview, have you been to a clinical governance meeting? Now, rather than talking about this now, I just wanted to highlight that on the 5th of August, the clinical governance lead for cardiology in our institution will be doing a cardio webinar for yourselves. And that will continue our preparing to be a consultant cardio webinar theme. Finance. This was the one that scared me the most. Let's have a look at this list on the bottom on the left. Now, to be honest with you, with about a month and a half leading up to the interview, a lot of these terms were things I was aware of, but certainly did not have a grasp for. Certainly were things that I would feel very nervous about if I was asked about in an interview. And I had two questions, interview related to finance. So look at these terms: commissioners, providers, performance indicators, referral to treatment time, payment by results, tariff, HRG codes, coding, PLIX, benchmarking, procurement, revenue and capital, consignment versus purchase, tender. These are just some of the buzzwords that the finance team, and I'll tell you now, the consultant body know these terms inside out because they're working with these terms day in, day out. We as registrars just focus on the clinical work, but we don't really get the opportunity to engage in this. And it's really important to try to identify and get that opportunity early. So it's very helpful to go and observe at a directorate, divisional, executive meeting where these things are discussed. Now, many of these are now virtual, so they're much easier to attend. And all of these are published online. So you can actually look at your trust's financial data, governance data on their website because they publish it. And I think it's, when you start to think about these terms, it's important to think about, because these are the questions that come up. It's how do you increase efficiency in your department? How do you set up a new service? How do you get a new piece of kit, especially if you're an interventional doctor? How would you get a new sheath? Or how would you get a new TAVI valve, or so on and so forth? How does the NHS long-term plan affect your service? Now, in September, we will also do a finance in cardiology webinar. If you want to look at this more, I thought this was a really, really good website, futurefocusedfinance.nhs.uk. This site covers a lot about finance that you might want to hear about for NHS clinicians. Alternatively, the kingsfund.org.uk. This has got ample amounts of information for you as well. Finally, some helpful resources. There's the early cardiology career course that the BCS run. Early consultant career course that the BCS run. And I went on it as a final year. It was very helpful. This runs annually. If you're a London trainee, I'd strongly advocate attending the cardiology trainee management course. This runs, well, it was prior to COVID, it was running every week. It may or may not be coming back in the near future. And then this was a really nice paper from Chris McAloon and his colleagues, which was published in Heart, which is about achieving success in the consultant interview. It's just 2 pages. It essentially reiterates a lot of what we talked about here. But it was nice to have this as well as a written piece of documentation. So in summary, there's a lot I've covered, but if I were to say, what would I do now if I had my time again, things to take away to do after this talk is, one, is really go away and start thinking about what is your USP. And if you've not got one, start thinking about how you're going to create one. Prepare a relevant CV, not just a CV, but a relevant CV that tells the reader what it is that you bring to them. And again, what is your USP? Get someone more experienced to read it. Register with NHS Jobs and review an application form. It really helps. And start getting the telephone links on your phone. Start documenting these emotive cases that reflect personal qualities. Ask to observe a clinical governance in a directorate meeting. Again, I think that really helps. Watch the next At Cardio webinars, preparing to be a consultant series. Now, around the application time, remember, learn the trust values, read the CQC report, go on an interview course. And I do think it's helpful to get your brain engaged in finance and start thinking about how you would set up a new service. Thanks very much, and over to you, Balric, and if Afsal, if you want to unmute yourself for Q&A.
Where's Balric, who's disappeared? Okay, that's really good, Vish. That's a nice summary, and congratulations as well. Vish is atypical because he just smashed it. He went for one interview, got it straight away, and he he didn't have to look for a job. He had multiple hospitals chasing him, saying, "Come and work with us. Come and work with us." So he's a real star. But those words are very, very relevant to people who even aren't in that situation. But yeah, I guess this is for the audience really. So if you want to talk to us and ask any specific questions, fire away. Is there much coming through, Barbara?
Not yet, but so if there is any questions, guys, this is your chance. So, as I said earlier, either use the raise hand function, or you can put the questions through on the chat, and I can unmute you. I think whilst we're waiting for people to put questions through, Asa, it might be quite useful just to get to hear a bit about your story and how you found the consultant interview process.
Yeah, so I didn't. I went through a slightly different route. So I applied for a couple of jobs before I ended up getting this one, which I have now and very happy with. But for the first two jobs I applied for, I was up against people who were already doing the job as a locum. So that's quite a different situation. So in that situation, unless the locum who's doing the job has desperately upset the department, they're probably going to get the job, because it's better the devil you know. They've usually kind of used that locum period as a very long-term interview for that person, and if they're happy with them, they usually put the advert out, and usually it's a shoo-in. But it was great practice, and it really got me up to speed with the interview process. My word of warning against doing something like that is, when you do apply for a job, it's a lot of work. So Vish mentioned all the visits you have to do, like meeting the managers and all the consultants and the execs, and reading up about the trust, and what their values are and what their financial challenges are and what their aims are for the coming years. That all takes a lot of time, and it's valuable time at the end of your training, particularly if you're doing something procedural like interventional cardiology or even advanced imaging or EP. Yeah, you want to be spending those last few months of your training really fine tuning your skills. And if you're going off 2 weeks to prepare for an interview where you're almost 90% chance not going to get the job, and then you have to think, is it worth applying for it at all? You could probably do it once, because it gets you ready. It gets you to tidy up your CV. It gets you to read up on the process. It gets you to kind of get your house in order. But doing it more than once, I'd probably advise against. And I did that more than once. I think the other thing to say is often you end up having to make a compromise, and I kind of think the three variables for most people tend to be the location of the job, the subspecialty, and whether it's in a tertiary centre versus a DGH. And some people are very lucky and they get all three. Most people will need to make a compromise on one, and for me, location was very important because of family and my partner's work. I think Vish was a bit more flexible, weren't you? So you were happy to go up to Liverpool from London, because the job was perfect. So I think, sometimes you're lucky and everything you want lands in the right place, but often something has to compromise. Something has to give, and you have to decide what's most important to you. Is it, for EP, is it doing VT ablations in a tertiary centre and doing lots of complex stuff, or is it kind of staying in London if that's where you trained, or another part of the country? So I think you have to think about all of those things as well. The other probably point to mention about this is the phone calls. I think technically, officially canvassing for a job like that is technically not allowed, but I think everyone does it. Usually, you'll find. I think the way to really understand it is just let all your consultants know that you're applying for a job, because if they know you're applying for a particular job, they'll often would have trained with the people working in that department. They probably know them from sort of committees and various other projects they've been working on over the years. And if they're impressed by you and they want to make a strong recommendation, they'll probably phone consultants in that department without any prompting at all. So my key advice there is just if you are applying for a job, don't keep it a secret within your department. Tell everyone that you're applying for that job. They'll often give you an insight. So, for example, if that job has come out and you are thinking about applying for it, if you tell your consultants you're applying for a job in a particular unit, they might say, actually, oh yeah, that's a really good idea. I know why they're looking for a new consultant, because they need to do X, Y, and Z, or they might give you some other advice saying, oh well, actually, that's there's a lot of there's a lot of friction in that department. Are you sure you're going to fit in? So they can give you some insights as well. So my key advice there is tell all the people you're working with that you're applying for that job. I don't know what your thoughts on that are, Vish.
Yeah, I agree. I think being open and honest with your own unit is important, and especially if there are associations between your unit and the other unit, or there are, faculty who know each other, then that really does help the process.
I
There's a
think there's a
question.
raised hand, isn't there? Yeah.
There's a question from Adam.
Adam, I'll just
Vish,
unmute you.
I can just read it out. Vish, did you find out if there were preferred candidates for any jobs you were looking at? What did I mean? So I was.
I don't think Vish can answer that question because Vish is always the preferred candidate. So, I think with in some circumstances it's very obvious. So, for example, if there's a locum doing the job, and I think ISC, who are one of the companies who do the interview courses, I think they've surveyed people who've attended their course over the years, and I think they quoted in 70% of the cases where it's a locum going for the job, for the substantive job, they get it. So I mean, in the vast majority, the locum will get it, but that means that there's 30% who don't. So there's always a chance potentially. How you get a sense for it, I think that's very hard to say. Sometimes your own bosses will get a sense of it and they'll tell you. But often it's very obvious if it is a locum who's going to get the locum in place, who's going to get the job.
I think there's a few more questions coming through.
Do you want to unmute them? It might be.
Yeah, sure.
Quickly, just to read through them, right? Chris Cook has said, does the panel have an idea if most new jobs are offered on a locum basis? So that really depends. If you know there are candidates, so I mean, I'm kind of looking at this from the other side because we're potentially going to have jobs coming up in our hospital over the coming years because we've got people approaching retirement, etc. So a locum's a good way of testing out if you get on with someone, and if you don't have anyone in mind, then it's a good way of kind of testing the waters. If you know there are eligible candidates out there, then actually making the job advert come out as a substantive post is an incentive to make sure people apply, and it makes the job attractive. So I mean, Vish went straight into a substantive post. That's probably because the place he was applying to knew that there were good candidates out there, and if they didn't want to lose them to another unit, they probably just needed to advertise it as a substantive post. So I think there's various things. The job I'm doing now came out as a locum first, and then I applied for it as a substantive and got it. So it's really variable. Consultant jobs in general in the UK, outside of cardiology and outside of some of the more competitive units, it's a buyer's market. So you'll find that if you look at consultant jobs across the board, you'll find out probably the majority are coming out as substantive adverts. Maybe for interventional cardiology, in London it might be a bit different. I don't know. Did you have anything to add to that, Vish? From what you?
Yes. I mean, what did we see? I mean, it seems that there's been a recent influx of substantive EP posts we've been seeing in the last few months. But
exactly, and it was the opposite when I was applying. It was locum. Exactly. I think probably because there are. I think because all the units which are now looking to recruit know that there are people out there, so they're just making them substantive posts because they want to get the people in.
Yeah.
I think there's another question from Gulrez here.
Yeah. Do you have to make a USP that hospitals want, even if you're not particularly interested in that skill? Or can you do something you're interested in and hope that it might be possible to do or balance in between?
Shall I do that one?
Yeah, go on.
I mean, the key thing is you should do the thing that you're interested in, because the thing that you're interested in is the thing you're going to do best at. And it's the thing that you'll be able to evolve as much as possible. I'm not quite sure what would be an example of.
So yeah, no, I've got a good example. So the first locum job I applied, the first job I applied for, where I was up against a locum who was already in place, was a job where they wanted the focus to be on lead extraction for pacing. So that the person who'd been doing the locum had been doing it as a locum for 6 months, so they could very easily say, well, I've already been doing it for 6 months. And lead extraction is not something you really do as a registrar. It's something you might as a first operator independently with the consultant sort of behind the screen. It's often with the consultant either scrubbing right next to you, or you helping the consultant, because it's a high stakes procedure. I mean, in that situation, it can be difficult, but you can kind of, I think you just have to put your cards on the table and say that that's something you're willing to adapt to and learn. If you're not interested, if that's something you're not interested in at all, then you kind of have to think, well, is that going to be the right job for you? Because remember, you're going to be doing this for the next 20, 30 years. And if that's what they want someone to do, you could say, well, you could try and do it for a couple of years and try and get out of it. But I mean, that'll probably come through when you go and meet the department and speak to the various personalities there. And it'd probably be the same for VT ablation as well, Vish, wouldn't it? I think. I mean, if you weren't interested in VT, would you thought about doing that job? If they said we don't, you know, if the job you got now was a lead extraction job, would you have applied for it?
No.
Exactly. So.
Yeah.
I actually had one more question. In those, I suppose this is now thinking about if you don't get a job at your first, second, third interview, at that point, when do you have to bite the bullet and start taking up fellowship jobs or fellow posts? And in those fellow posts, are you allowed to be applying for posts through that year and stop early if you need to take a consultant post? How does that arena work?
Yeah, no, that's fine. I mean, I worked into my post CCT period, and I applied for a job during that, and I just gave my notice. So, in theory, I could have stayed on in that job, that post CCT fellowship job, for a year, but I ended up leaving early. It's not really a problem. People know that you need to get a consultant job, so it's accepted that you might need to leave. If you're with a very understanding unit, and if you're really keen, for example, if you've gone over to a different country to do an overseas fellowship, even if you're doing a normal job in the NHS, you have to give 3 months notice. So you could easily extend that a little bit longer before you take up a new post. So it's not a huge problem. It can be worked around.
The point about the overseas fellowship, if I was a panel thinking of what the candidate offers me, how much does an overseas fellowship offer the hospital in question that's employing?
You're probably asking the wrong people, because neither Vish nor I did overseas fellowship. It depends what you're doing. I think there was, I mean, we're both EP, so I don't know how relevant this is to everyone, but there was a phase where other countries were much ahead of the curve when it came to things like AF ablation and some of the more complex stuff in EP. Yeah. People would go abroad to get their skills and then bring them back. But now I think we do everything here. So I think, Vish has done lots of VT ablation here. So he wouldn't really gain anything particularly by going overseas to do that. I don't know if that necessarily applies with interventional cardiology or advanced imaging or heart failure. I mean, potentially there are skills you can gain overseas which would make you an attractive candidate, particularly for some of the tertiary centres. If you can bring something new to the table, then obviously that does make you a more attractive candidate.
Okay, perfect. I think we're coming up to 6:30. So if there's no other questions, I wonder if Vish or Alistair, have you have anything else to add?
No, I think just to make sure that we reiterate this slide, I think this is the key thing of what you might want to do.
I think one other thing I'd probably want to say is, if you're applying, sorry, I just muted myself accidentally there. What you don't want to do is put the form in and then not do the work, because that almost has the opposite effect of looking bad on you. So I think you can apply for a job expecting not to get it, but then I think you should still turn up and do the visits and talk to everyone, because that feedback can come back to your unit and to other hospitals as well. So if you apply for a job, put the effort in. Otherwise, don't bother applying at all, I would say.
Aaron, we're going to close, I just want to say to everyone, so this is the first time we're running a cardio webinar specifically, which is related to preparing to being a consultant. I hope it was useful, because we're going to try to introduce this more into the monthly theme moving forward. So I don't know whether there's a way of getting I don't know if you write something on the chat as if that's a thumbs up or not. I'm assuming it is, but something like that just to be helpful, because then I think we can then use that as a stimulus to keep doing more and more moving forward. I think we can do 3 weeks will be education, and then 1 week will be kind of consultant preparation based discussion. And yeah, on that note, I'm going to hand over back to Baurik to close.
Perfect. Thanks, Chris, and thanks, Asa. That was a fantastic talk, and actually highlighted a lot of things that we absolutely don't think about, and things that I hadn't thought of much before. So it's really, really useful. As always, if you missed any of the talk or want to go over it again, do visit the BJCA TV video gallery where the video will be uploaded. And for the rest of the program and updates, please do follow us at CardioWebinar on our Twitter account, where we'll provide an uploaded program. And then on to our next session, which is actually Asa speaking to us again, but this time on the indications for an EP study and what 4Wire EP study actually entails. And that's on Wednesday, 15th of July at the same time of 5:30 p.m. So from myself and on behalf of everyone else, thanks again to Vish and Asa for a fantastic talk today. And I hope you all have a good rest of the week.
Thanks, guys.